Hey, what's up, guys? This is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our DraftKings FanDuel MLB video for, let's see, we got Wednesday, July 20th today. It's a split slate. We're going to be talking about the nighttime slate here today. Only 7 games on tap, so let's get right into them. What we like to do here in the Benny's Bat section is we take a look at each pitcher that's on the mound, figure out what their weaknesses are, and then try to figure out which bat's profile to do the best against them. So let's start with the Miami against Philly game. The game is in Philadelphia, so a good hitter's ballpark. Wei-Yin Chen, the lefty, on the mound for Miami. Now, this is a guy, right-handed bats have a much higher average against him. He's tough on lefties, so I'm probably not looking at any of the lefties on Philly today. Right-handed bats do have a very high fly ball rate against them, though, and they do have a home run about every 5 innings. So I do think some of these big right-handed bats on the Phillies team are in a pretty good spot here. You know, a guy like Tommy Joseph actually stands out to me. He's hit home runs in 5 of his last 8 games. I think 4 of his last 6 he's homered in. He does have that home run upside that we're looking for here today against Wei-Yin Chen. He's very cheap over on FanDuel. I think he's only like $2,500 over there. So I definitely think he's somebody in play. Also think you can look at guys like Maikel Franco and Cameron Rupp. Both of these guys do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. And again, like we said, Chen struggles with these righties. He gives up home runs to righties at a pretty alarming rate. So the guys that have the power to take them deep, the Francos, the Rupps, the Tommy Josephs, you know, those are the kind of guys you want in your lineup here today for Philly. On the other side of this game, we got Jeremy Hellickson pitching for the Phillies, and he's actually been pretty solid in 2016. Left-handed bats do have a higher average, higher home run rate against them. Not a ton of left-handed bats I'm scared of on this Miami team. You know, you got guys like maybe Yelich, maybe a Dietrich in there. You probably won't get Ichiro with all the outfielders being being healthy. And then even a guy like Giancarlo Stanton, I know righty on righty matchups, he's about a 355 WOBA, has an ISO well over 200. He's just got power against anybody, and it's a good home run hitter's ballpark, good park bump up for this Miami team in Philly. So I do think you can look at some of these bats, but honestly, Hellickson hasn't been a guy that targeting a lot of bats against has paid off for this season. Next game, we can talk about Baltimore at New York. This one's kind of tough for me. You know, you got Michael Pineda on the mound. Pineda's been pretty tough on right-handed bats. You usually want to attack him with lefties. He's actually been pitching even better than his numbers suggest, and he's had some good starts. Now, this Baltimore team, they can put up 10 runs, but they can also strike out 10 times a game, which is why I think Pineda makes a decent GPP option if you're looking for one today. You know, the biggest left-handed bat on this on this Orioles team is actually Chris Davis, and Davis hasn't been in the lineup the last 2 days. So if there's no Davis, you're looking at, guys like Wieters hitting from the left side, maybe a Pedro Alvarez a little further on down in the lineup. I mean, the lineup gets a lot weaker when you take Davis out of there. So if you don't have Davis, I think this is a pretty sneaky good spot against Pineda. You know, guys like Jonathan Scope and Manny Machado, both 370 plus WOBA, 200 plus ISO guys against right-handed pitching and righty on righty matchups. So it's not ideal spot for them, but they do hit righties well. So I think those would be the 2 bats I would look at against Pineda if I'm taking anybody. On the other side, you got Yovani Gallardo, and Gallardo's not really a good pitcher, but this Yankees offense isn't all that big with the upside. Carlos Beltran, right around the 360 WOBA, 200 ISO, probably the best bat they have in the lineup. You know, he's hitting over 300 this year. Probably my favorite play if you're looking at anybody on the Yankees. Brian McCann will probably be popular because he's a lefty going up against a right-handed pitcher that's not very good at home in Yankee Stadium. I don't really love him. I think his ownership in tournaments is usually a little bit too high. If you want to use him in cash games for the block, I think that makes some sense because I do think he's going to be one of the highest-owned catchers on the slate today. Other than that, I mean, you can look at guys like Ellsbury and Gardner if you want to, but there's really just not a ton of upside there, not guys that I'd really put on a lot of tournament rosters. Next game, we can talk about the LA Dodgers against the Washington Nationals. You got Gio Gonzalez on the mound for Washington. Right-handed bats, higher average, higher home run percentage against him. You know, the Dodgers are starting to get a little bit healthy. You got a guy like Yasiel Puig back in the lineup. He hits left-handed pitching well. Scott Van Slyke is back in the mix right now. He's another guy that historically has always hit left-handed pitching, although, the power numbers haven't really been there this season. Maybe even a Justin Turner who's hitting in the 3-hole. I know Turner's usually better in righty on righty matchups, but again, another right-handed bat you can use to attack Gio Gonzalez. I don't really hate that, but I don't see a huge number coming out of this Dodgers team. So it's not a team that I want to stack up and have a ton of exposure to. The other side of the game, we got Bud Norris, who's been great lately. I mean, like really, really good lately. You know, some people are saying he started throwing this changeup or has kind of gone away from some of the other pitches he's been using. and he's been getting pretty good results with it. Career-wise, though, he's always been worse against left-handed pitching. Against left-handed batters. So I think the lefties are the way you want to try to attack him. Bryce Harper, huge 439 WOBA, 306 ISO score against right-handed pitching. So you got to think that he's somebody that's in play. Daniel Murphy back in the lineup, 376 WOBA, 222 ISO for him, so he's in play. Maybe even a Ben Revere leading off. The left-handed bats are the way I want to go after Bud Norris, so those would be the guys I'd be looking at on Washington. Next game we can talk about Milwaukee at Pittsburgh. You got Jeff Locke on the mound for Pittsburgh, and Locke is not a good pitcher. Right-handed bats hitting 293 against him, 11 home runs in 72 innings. I actually love this Milwaukee lineup against left-handed pitching. I tend to stack them up anytime they're going up against a lefty. I know it's a park downgrade in Pittsburgh here, but you got a lot of guys here that can do damage against left-handed pitching. Ryan Braun, 413 WOBA, 234 ISO is in play. Jonathan Villar, 367 WOBA, 155 ISOs in play. Then you got guys like Chris Carter and Lucroy, who I really like. Both guys that can hit left-handed pitching. And then Hernan Perez is the guy who has slid into that 2 spot that Aaron Hill used to, basically take whenever they went up against the left-handed pitching. He had a home run the last time he was in the 2 spot against a lefty, and is somebody who can hit left-handed pitching. So I think he's another guy that at the very least you got to consider. If you're stacking them up, I'd probably include the top 5 that we just mentioned right there, and go against Locke that way. On the other side of this game, we got Chase Anderson, and Anderson's actually a reverse splits guy. Righties are hitting 324 against him this year with 12 home runs and 42 innings. So, right-handed bats have really knocked them around. This Pittsburgh offense is struggling, but there are some guys who hit righties well in righty-on-righty matchups. Sterling Marte, Andrew McCutchen, Jung Ho Kang if he's in there. All these guys, 350-plus WOBAs and a little bit of power against right-handed pitching and righty-on-righty matchups. So I think they're all solid right-handed bats right there that you can look at going up against Chase Anderson, although they're getting a park downgrade as well. I mean, Pittsburgh, not a very good hitter's park. I don't expect this to be like a 10-7 kind of game, but I do think you can pick and choose a bat here and there. Next game we have is San Francisco against Boston. Drew Pomeranz going to be making his debut here for the Boston Red Sox. He's going up against a team he knows well in San Francisco. Pitched against them a lot when he was in San Diego. Pomeranz has been tough on both right and left-handed bats this year. He's been really, really good. And this San Francisco lineup is kind of weak at the moment. You got a lot of injuries. Guys like Matt Duffy are down. Guys like Hunter Pence are down. Even some of the lefties like Panic's been out of the lineup for a while. With Pomeranz being a lefty, I don't see these lefties being in play. So guys like Span and Belt and Crawford, really the only bat that I like is kind of Buster Posey. 350-plus WOBA for Posey against left-handed pitching. I think he's probably in the best spot. Decent park upgrade going to Boston from San Francisco. But I expect this to be a pretty good start for Pomeranz. I think he's the top pitcher on the late slate and, probably the top price pitcher as well. And I think he's probably going to be the highest owned. And I do think he has the best chance to have the biggest score today. The other side of this game, Matt Cain. Cain is somebody who I'm expecting to get lit up here. Interestingly, if you look at the implied totals for today, which is basically like when the spread comes out, if it's 10 or 11 runs, the implied total is how many runs they think each team is going to make. Right now, the Red Sox implied runs total is like 6.25, I think, like 6.2 or something like that, which is the highest one on the day. It's even higher than the 2 teams that are playing in Coors Field. So the Red Sox are who Vegas considers to be the team that's going to put up the most runs here today. Now, whenever you have a right-handed pitcher, David Ortiz always in play, 439 WOBA, 350 ISO. This guy has just been absolutely amazing against right-handed pitching all season, especially at home. So Ortiz definitely the top play on the board. Mookie Betts, 357 WOBA, 200 ISO. He's another guy you can look at. If you want to look at some of the other left-handed bats here, guys like Travis Shaw and Jackie Bradley Jr., I think, are in play. And I even think some of these right-handed bats at the top of the order, the Dustin Pedroias, the Xander Bogaerts, the Hanley Ramirez's, all these guys I think are in play. So I don't think you can have too much exposure to the Red Sox here. They have the highest implied run total by far on this slate. So I definitely think they're a team that's going to be popular. Hard to stack up because they're all expensive, but definitely some team that I think could pay off with, some big dividends here today. Next game, we can talk about San Diego against St. Louis. Now, they're playing a doubleheader today, so just make sure you look at the lineups before the game starts, because whenever a team has 2 games in a day, there's going to be some guys who are going to be sitting out in this one. Jaime Garcia is on the mound for St. Louis, and he's kind of a reverse splits left-hander. Left-handed bats actually have a higher average against them. He's pretty tough on righties. Looking at the San Diego order, there's no lefties that you really want to take. There are a couple righties that do hit left-handed pitching pretty well. Will Myers, 395 WOBA, 209 ISO. Definitely think you got to consider him. Matt Kemp hits left-handed pitching incredibly well, 373 WOBA, 259 ISO, big upside there. So I think those two guys could make it a little bit of a tough day on Garcia, but I think he kind of gets through the rest of this lineup pretty easily. So on FanDuel, he's kind of cheap. He might not be a horrible play over there. Could be a decent, way to save some salary and get some of those Red Sox bats in. The other side of this game, we got Paul Clemens pitching, and he's basically a relief pitcher. They're stretching him out for the start because they have a doubleheader after the rain delay yesterday. But I think this is going to be, what we like to refer to as a bullpen game. I mean, you might get 4 or 5 innings out of Clemens. You're going to get 2 or 3 innings out of a couple of relievers, and, they're going to kind of try to patch it together that way. The St. Louis team, they're pretty solid. Again, you got to make sure you see who's in the lineup. Randall Gierchuk, if he's leading off like he was supposed to yesterday, I think he's definitely somebody that's in play. He's kind of cheap. If he's leading off, he hits right-handed pitching well. Gierchuk, probably my favorite outfielder. I don't hate Holiday and Piscotty as well. I think you can at least consider those two guys. Matt Adams should probably be in the 5 hole with Brandon Moss hurt. He should be the first baseman. The lefty going up against a righty, I think, is in a pretty good spot here. Other than that, maybe you get a Greg Garcia leading off. That's not a horrible play. I do think St. Louis puts up some runs. St. Louis is one of those lineups that, everybody hits top to bottom, kind of like the Royals were last year, which is great in real life baseball, but it's tough in fantasy because you really don't know where the production is going to come from. So, you could take 2 or 3 guys in this lineup and wind up not scoring any fantasy points, or you could take 2 or 3 guys in this lineup and you could happen to hit on the right guys and they can get you 40 or 50. So I'm not using too many St. Louis guys in cash, but I definitely don't mind stacking them up in the tournament if you want to go, and attack Clemens and the bullpen there. And then the last game on the day is Texas against the LA Angels. You got Martin Perez on the mound for Texas. High average that he gives up to both righties and lefties. Righties obviously a little bit better, but Perez is never really a guy that gets lit up. And part of the reason why is he's a high ground ball pitcher. He throws a lot of ground balls, doesn't give up a lot of home runs. So by throwing a lot of ground balls, he kind of keeps himself in the games. He might only go 5 or 6 innings. He may give up 3 or 4 runs, but he's not a guy that ever really gets lit up for like 10 or 11 runs. He usually is able to control the damage. Obviously, if you're looking at any bats on the Angels, Mike Trout's the one that stands out right away. Over a 400 WOBA, over a 200 ISO against left-handed pitching. He's just an absolute monster, the best player in baseball, in my opinion. Trout's in play every day. And then I think you got to look at Pujols. In Pujols' last 3 games, he's 5 of 9 with 4 home runs. So the guy is absolutely on fire. Now, we do like him better in righty-on-righty matchups, but he can hit lefties as well. Like I said, the one problem I have with him against Perez not really a guy that gives up a ton of fly balls or a ton of home runs. So I don't know if this is really the best matchup for Pujols. I think his ownership will be high because he's double-donged in 2 of his last 3 games. I like him, but I don't love him here. And I think in tournaments, he'll be higher owned than I expect him to be. So he's probably a guy that I'm not going to use. On the other side of this game, you got Hector Santiago. He's solid, but he does give up a lot of walks, and he also gives up a lot of home runs, which is bad if you want to use him today, as I think he's like the 2nd or 3rd highest priced pitcher on FanDuel. You can't use a guy that has a high walk rate and a lot of home runs allowed, because if you walk a guy or 2 and then you give up a home run, now you're down 2 or 3 runs, and that's never a good thing that you want to see. Right-handed bats do have a higher average, higher fly ball rate, and more home runs against them. So a guy like Ian Desmond is having a huge bounce-back year. Homered again yesterday. 315 is his average right now. He's got 17 home runs on the year. Hits better against left-handed pitching. Number 2 in the order there. So I think Ian Desmond's in play. He's actually more expensive than Mike Trout on FanDuel today. He's $4,300 as opposed to Trout, who's only $4K, which I thought was interesting. If you're asking me which of those 2 I'm going to take, it's still going to be Mike Trout. But if you want to be contrarian, I definitely think paying up for Desmond could be a way to do that today. Also think you got to look at Beltre. He's hit left-handed pitching well his entire career. As long as he's hitting cleanup, he's in a good spot in the order. He can drive in some runs, get some hits. And then Jurickson Profar is another guy who's kind of on my radar. Since Chu's been banged up, he's been out of the lineup recently. With Chu out of the lineup, we've seen Profar back to the leadoff spot. If he's leading off again here today, I definitely think he's somebody that's in play. Has a really good numbers against both right and left-handed pitching. He's been solid since he's got called up when Odor got in that fight and hooked off on Joey Bats. Profar came up and played for him when he was suspended, and he did an admirable job. So I think Profar is somebody else I want to look at. He's first and third base eligible, I think, on DraftKings, and he's pretty cheap. So he could be a way to, kind of fit in some high-end pitching and still give yourself some upside. So that wraps it up. Like I said, we only had a 7-game slate for the night games, and we went through each one of them, kind of gave you guys some good spots. So thank you for joining us here at rotocurve.com, and as always, stay classy, DFS.